They thought Clara Bell had lost everything when the hospital took her name, and maybe, standing in that alley in the rain, she had. But the woman they threw into the cold carried three things no one could take from her: a watch that still ticked, a child that still moved, and the one truth powerful men feared most: a heartbeat never lies. That was the night the city learned something it should have known sooner. A woman can lose her job, lose her shelter, lose her name, and still carry the truth powerful men could not bury. St. Agnes Hospital stood at the edge of the city the way a lighthouse stands at the edge of a cliff, bright, dominant, and indifferent to whatever was drowning below it. Clara Bell had worked its corridors for 4 years. She had learned the sound of every cart, the smell of every ward, and the particular silence of a room when a family stopped hoping and started waiting. She had been good at this work. She had been proud of it. And at 11:43 on a Wednesday night in November, she sat on an overturned plastic crate in the service alley behind the hospital, holding a letter that was still damp from the rain and a canvas bag that had belonged to her mother. The letter had Dr. Alden Pike's signature at the bottom. She had stared at that signature for 10 minutes. She knew that name. She had seen it before, not just at the bottom of her termination notice, but printed in small, precise letters at the bottom of a pharmaceutical approval form she had photographed 3 weeks ago. She had not imagined the labels were wrong. She had not imagined the batch numbers. She had photographs. She had taken them on a Tuesday morning, when the phlebotomist at the charity clinic had asked her quietly why the pills in the latest shipment were a different shade than the ones before, and whether she thought that was normal. Clara had told her it might be nothing. Then she had gone to Dr. Pike with the photographs, and Dr. Pike had told her, in the polished voice of a man who had never once doubted his own authority, "You were a nurse, Miss Bell, not a savior." He had paused, as though she might like a moment to feel the distinction. Then he had added, "A nurse with no hospital does not get to accuse a doctor with my name." The termination notice arrived the following morning. Clara pressed her back against the cold brick and breathed carefully through her nose. She was 4 months pregnant. The coat she was wearing had belonged to her mother too, wide across the shoulders, and longer than it needed to be, which was the only reason no one had noticed. She placed her hand flat against her stomach beneath the canvas bag and held it there. "We're okay," she said quietly. She did not entirely believe it, but the baby did not need to know that yet. She heard him before she saw him. Not footsteps, the rain-covered footsteps, but the specific sound of someone moving with effort, the kind of movement that costs something. A man came around the corner of the alley, one hand pressed against his forearm, jacket dark enough that she almost missed the deeper darkness spreading through the fabric. He was tall. He had the kind of stillness in his face that people develop not from peace but from long practice at controlling whatever is not peaceful underneath. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying, from the particular exhaustion of a person who has stopped being able to do the thing their body requires most. She recognized that look. She had seen it in ICU families. She had never seen it walking toward her in a service alley. He looked at the canvas bag on her lap, at the uniform beneath her coat, and he said, without preamble and without apology, "Sleep beside me. I'll pay any price." Clara's hand moved to the strap of the bag. She said nothing. He took one step back, deliberate, visible, and held up the hand that wasn't pressed against the wound. "I don't mean your body." His voice was level, but there was something fraying at the edges of it. I mean your hands, your watch, your voice, if you have one left. I haven't slept in 3 years. She looked at him for a long moment. At the blood coming through his sleeve, at the shadows under his eyes that had not formed in one night. I don't sell comfort, she said. I stopped bleeding. She stood up, opened the canvas bag, and pointed at the broken crate beside him. His name was Viktor Sloane. She didn't know that yet when she cut the sleeve of his jacket open with the small pair of medical scissors from her mother's bag. But she would know it within the hour, because people in the city tended to speak it the way they spoke about weather systems, not as a name, but as a category of event. The wound was deep but clean. She worked without speaking, and he let her, which she appreciated. When she pulled the roll of gauze from the bottom of the bag, her hand closed around the edge of the watch, and the familiar weight of it settled something in her chest. She set it on the crate beside her while she worked. The ticking was very clear in the wet quiet of the alley. She did not look at him when she noticed he had gone completely still. She counted her own internal rhythm. She wrapped the wound. She checked the edges. She said, "You'll need proper stitches by morning." He was still looking at the watch. "That sound," he said, "my mother's. I use it to count pulse." He was quiet for another moment. 3 years, he said, and it was not the same voice as before. The control was still there, but something underneath it had shifted. "The last time I slept, my brother was still alive." Clara tied off the bandage. She did not say she was sorry. She had learned, over 4 years of working with the dying and the grieving, that sorry asked nothing of the person who said it. She said instead, "What happens when you close your eyes?" He looked at her. "I count," he said. "Forward. There's nothing left to count." She should not have gone with him. She knew that. She catalogued the reasons systematically while Leo Grant, who she would later understand, was the only person Viktor Sloane trusted without qualification, drove them through the rain to a building that did not look like what it was from the outside. She was unemployed and 4 months pregnant and sitting in a car with a man whose wound she had dressed and whose name she still didn't know. But she was also wet and cold, and the baby had been still all evening in the quiet way that made her chest tight when she thought about it too long. And the man beside her had not once looked at her the way the bodyguard outside the hospital had looked at her. He had looked at her the way people look at a thing they do not understand, but are not willing to dismiss. She said, before they reached wherever they were going, "I have conditions." He turned to look at her. "My own room, door that locks from the inside, the right to leave at any time, and no one in your house treats me like I belong to you," he said. "Agreed," she said. "Say it like you mean it." He said, "Those are reasonable conditions. I will enforce them myself." She had not expected that. She stored it in the same place she stored. The fact that he had stepped back when she tensed. The fact that he had not touched the watch. The fact that he had not looked at her stomach once, which meant either he hadn't noticed or he was being very careful not to mention it. She was not yet sure which. The penthouse was not what she had expected. She had expected wealth. She had not expected the particular absence that wealth sometimes left when it was used to fill a space rather than inhabit one. There were no photographs, no plants. The furniture was expensive and impersonal, arranged the way hotel rooms were arranged, correctly, without preference. Viktor walked the perimeter of the main room with the methodical movement of a person whose body had stopped trusting stillness. Back and forth, back and forth. She set the canvas bag down on the kitchen counter and found a glass of water and sat in one of the chairs that faced the window. She took out the watch, set it on the arm of the chair, said, "Sit down." He stopped moving. He looked at her the way people look when they've forgotten that being told to do something simple is an option. He sat. The ticking was very clear. She said nothing. She did not perform calm. She simply was calm, the way she had trained herself to be calm, in rooms where calm was the only thing that helped. 40 minutes later, he was asleep. Not deeply, not peacefully. But his body had released something it had been bracing against for 3 years. And the sound of his breathing changed. And Clara sat in the chair and looked out at the rain, and held her hand flat against her stomach, and thought about what she was going to do next. He woke 5 hours later, with the particular startled quality of someone who doesn't recognize the sensation of having rested. He sat up sharply, looked at his hands, looked at the chair where she still sat, said nothing for a very long time. Clara said, "You slept," he said. "I know." She waited, he said. "I don't understand why." She looked at the watch. "My mother used it to teach me to count pulse. She said a heartbeat never lies. It tells you what the body is trying to say before the person knows how to say it." She paused. "I think the part of you that got stuck in that room is still listening for a heartbeat that stopped, and the ticking gives it something to count." He stared at the watch for a long time. Then he said, "I'll pay whatever you ask." "I know you will," Clara said. "That's not the point. The point is what I'm asking." She set out her conditions clearly and calmly, the way she set out care plans, and he agreed to each one with the same precision he had used in the car. Her own room, her own key, her hours, not his. The right to refuse any instruction she felt was wrong, and her name was Clara Bell, not the nurse, and she expected to be called by it. He said, "What else?" She said, "That's enough for now." She stood to go to the room Leo had shown her. At the door, she turned back. "Viktor." He looked up. "The reason the ticking helps is the same reason you can't sleep without it. You're not afraid of silence. You're afraid of counting through silence and finding nothing at the end." She went to bed. He sat in the dark with the watch ticking on the arm of the chair, and for the first time in 3 years, he did not pace until morning. He did not learn she was pregnant by looking at her. He learned it on the 4th morning, when she came into the kitchen and the smell of the coffee Leo had made reached her before she reached the counter. She turned away quickly. Her hand went to her stomach. Her face went very carefully neutral. Viktor set down his cup. She did not look at him. She said evenly, "The smell does that sometimes. It'll pass." She went to the window instead. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How far along?" 4 months. "Is the father?" "Not present," she said, "and not relevant to my work." He waited. She turned back to face him. "My child is not another reason for a man to control me." Her voice was steady. "I say that not because I think you would. I say it because I need you to have heard me say it." Viktor looked at her for a long time. He said, "I heard you." She nodded. She went back to the kitchen and made tea instead of coffee, and thought about her mother, who had never once waited for someone to give her permission to take up space. She told him about the termination on the 5th evening. She had not planned to, but he asked what she had done at St. Agnes, and she found herself describing the charity clinic and the labels and the photographs and the batch numbers and the pictures, particular contempt with which Dr. Alden Pike had said her name like it was something he was correcting. Viktor went very still. She had not yet learned to read the quality of his stillness. She did not know, as she was speaking, that she had just said a name he had been trying not to think about for 3 years. She said, "He called me a nurse who thought she was a savior." Viktor said, "Pike treated my brother." Clara stopped. He said, "Before Milo died, 3 years ago. He was treated at a clinic that Pike supplied." The silence was very thick, she said carefully. "What did Milo die of?" Viktor's jaw was tight. The hospital called it a natural complication. Clara kept her voice level. "And you believed them?" "I didn't have a reason not to." He paused. "Until now." He told her about Milo the way people tell stories that cost them something. Slowly, with long pauses, and only the details that could be said without breaking. Milo had been 24. He had left voice messages instead of texts because he said, Viktor's life already had too many cold words and he refused to add to them. There was one voice message left in Viktor's phone that he had not been able to delete and not been able to listen to. Milo had died on a Tuesday in August. Viktor had been there. He had laid his hand on his brother's chest and felt each heartbeat slow and then slow further and then stop, and he had kept his hand there for a long time after, because the alternative was admitting there was nothing left to count. Clara sat across from him and let him speak. She did not fill the silence. When he was finished, she said, "That is why the watch helps. It gives the part of you still trapped in that room a heartbeat that does not stop." Viktor looked at her. She said, "It doesn't fix it, but it gives that part of you somewhere to rest." Viktor wanted to end Dr. Alden Pike immediately, quietly, and in a manner that involved no courtrooms and no newspapers. Clara said no. He told her he didn't remember asking. She said, "If you bury him in the dark, he becomes another rumor. I need him exposed in the light." He said, "Why?" "Because the patients at that clinic are still being treated with the same supply chain. Because if you make Pike disappear, nobody changes the supplier, nobody pulls the batches, nobody tells those patients that what they took was not what they were told it was. Milo becomes one more body in a pattern nobody will ever be allowed to name." The silence was very long, she said. "You can make him afraid. You can make him face a room full of people who know what he did. But you cannot bury him and also save anyone else." Viktor stood at the window for a long time. He said, "You are asking me to let someone who killed my brother live. I am asking you to let him answer for it where the answer can save other people." He did not agree immediately, but he did not refuse. Leo Grant was not what she had expected a Mafia boss's driver to be. He was quiet, methodical, and had the particular efficiency of a person who has spent years watching someone else make decisions and developing very strong opinions about which ones were good. He confirmed what she had suspected. The pharmaceutical supplier, who had provided the charity clinic 3 years ago, was the same supplier in the current batch she had photographed. The route was the same. The relabeling pattern was the same. The approval signature at the bottom of the procurement forms was the same. Dr. Alden Pike, Nadia Price, the pharmacist from the charity clinic who had first noticed the pills were a different shade, had not disappeared as Clara had feared. She had simply gone very quiet and taken a position at a small pharmacy on the eastern side of the city, and when Leo sat across from her, in the back booth of a diner, and told her that someone was finally building a case, she had cried for a while, and then said she still had the original packaging from 3 separate batches she had never been able to throw away. There was someone else, Mason Vale. Viktor said his name once, in the same flat tone in which people said the names of things they had decided not to feel anything about yet. Mason was his lieutenant. Mason controlled the charitable distribution warehouse that moved pharmaceutical supplies to the clinics that couldn't afford hospital procurement. Mason had been at Milo's funeral. He had stood at Viktor's right shoulder through the burial and said nothing, because there is nothing useful to say at a funeral. But he had known. He had known the whole time, and Viktor sat with that for 2 days, and then put it somewhere it could not reach him yet, because he still needed to think clearly. Clara received a message from a number she didn't recognize. It said it was Nadia. It said there was original documentation locked in the warehouse, procurement orders, original batch records, shipping logs, and that she had a window to retrieve them before they were moved. Clara read the message 3 times. She was not naive. She knew what a message that arrived at convenient timing, from a number she didn't have on file, asking her to go somewhere alone at night, was likely to be. But the batch number in the message was correct. The specific, non-public batch number she had photographed, which meant whoever sent it had access to real documentation. She sat with the watch in her hand for a long time. Then she wrote a note, clear and detailed, and left it in the center of Viktor's desk. She texted Leo the address. Then she sent him a photo of the message. Then one more line. "Track me now. Do not wait." She slipped the small recorder from her mother's bag into her coat pocket before she left. She was not going because she trusted the message. She was going because someone had finally shown her where the proof was. She said to the baby quietly, "We're going to be careful." She went. The warehouse was legitimate looking in the way that things designed to be used for cover always were. Clean, organized. The kind of facility that passed inspections because it was supposed to pass inspections. Clara found the secondary door that Nadia's message had described. She found the shelving units. She found a crate with a batch number that matched the photograph in her bag, and inside it, 3 separate containers with labels that were subtly, technically, measurably wrong in the specific ways that Nadia had described months ago. The color of the tablets was slightly off, not dramatically wrong. Just the specific kind of wrong that would not register to a patient who had no baseline, who was told by someone with credentials that this was their medication, that they should take it twice a day with water. The kind of wrong that only registered to someone who had looked at the correct version often enough to know what right felt like. Clara photographed everything. The batch numbers, the supplier code on the inner packaging, the relabeling pattern, the original text still faintly visible under the adhesive layer if you held the container at the right angle under a light. She was pulling out her phone to message Leo when the lights came on. Mason Vale was not what she had expected. He was ordinary looking. He had an ordinary voice. "The poor don't leave lawsuits," Mason said, almost as if rehearsing the argument he had always meant to give Viktor. "They leave bills nobody pays." She kept her face very still. She kept her breathing slow and even. She moved her hand carefully so that it rested across her stomach. The baby moved once beneath her palm, small, insistent, a reminder that fear was not the only thing alive in the room. She said, "That logic only works if no one is keeping records." He looked at her hand on her stomach. He said something that she did not repeat afterward to anyone but Viktor, because some words are specific to the person who says them, and are not meant to be carried any further than the room where they are spoken. She breathed through it. She kept him talking. She asked him questions in the specific tone she used with frightened patience. Calm, interested, non-confrontational. And she noted that Mason Vale had the same quality as many frightened people. When someone seemed to be genuinely listening, the words kept coming. She heard the secondary entrance open when he was mid-sentence. Viktor moved with the specific efficiency of a person who has spent a long time being the most dangerous presence in any given room. He stopped when she held up her hand. His eyes were flat and cold, and his jaw was set in a way she had not seen before. She said, "Not to Viktor. Keep talking." Mason looked between them. Viktor said nothing. The silence was more effective than anything he might have said. Mason talked. He talked about the supplier and the routes, and the relabeling and the percentage he had taken, and the years of it, and how it had seemed very safe because the people who received the supply were the kind of people whose deaths generated paperwork and not investigations. He talked until Leo came through the secondary door with 2 other men. Then he stopped. Viktor stepped forward. Clara put her hand on his arm. She said, "Not here, not like this. Let him speak where everyone can hear." Viktor looked at her hand on his arm. He looked at her. He said nothing for a long time. Then he stepped back. The exposure took 3 weeks. It was not a single dramatic moment. It was a series of careful, documented, legally defensible disclosures. A medical board. A journalist who had been investigating pharmaceutical fraud for 2 years and recognized what she was looking at. A law firm that specialized in cases the wealthy found inconvenient. Dr. Alden Pike attempted to describe Clara as a disgruntled former employee with no credibility. He said this in front of Nadia Price, who had 3 original batch samples. He said it in front of the ledger records from the warehouse, which contained Mason Vale's shell payment history. He said it in front of a shipping log that connected the same supplier to a clinic that had treated Milo Sloane 3 years ago. He stopped saying it fairly quickly after that. The room had stopped believing him. That was the particular cruelty of the truth. It did not need to shout. It only needed the right people to see it at the same time. Dr. Pike had walked into that hearing, expecting to do what he had always done. Stand behind his credentials and let his reputation do the work. He had worn the same careful smile he had worn when he told Clara that a nurse with no hospital did not get to accuse a doctor with his name. Clara placed the batch photographs on the table. Nadia placed the original samples beside them. The smile left his face slowly, not because he felt guilty. Because, for the first time in a very long career, the room had stopped taking his word for it. Mason Vale did not disappear into one of Viktor's old silences. That was the point. His name entered the record beside the shell payments, the warehouse routes, and the fraudulent shipments. For once, betrayal was not buried. It was filed. Viktor did not attend the hearing. He sat in the penthouse and listened to the audio feed Leo had arranged. When the medical board's representative read aloud the finding that Milo Sloane's death would be reclassified from natural complication to medical negligence facilitated by fraudulent pharmaceutical supply, Viktor sat very still for a long time. The word negligence had weight. It was not the same weight as justice. But it was a name. It was Milo's name, placed in a document that would exist after this day, that would sit in a record that could not be quietly revised the way the original had been. He was real. He had been killed. It had not been natural. Viktor picked up his phone. He played the voice message. He had not listened to it in 3 years. Milo's voice was exactly as he remembered it, slightly faster than average, warm, with the habit of trailing off at the end of sentences as if he were leaving space for a reply. Milo's voice said, Hey, just called to say your jacket is still at my place. You're never getting it back, and also I love you. That's it. That's the whole message. Your life has too many cold words. I'm fixing it. Bye. Viktor listened to it 3 times. On the 3rd time, he stopped controlling whatever was under the stillness. Clara was sitting in the chair by the window, which was where she sat in the evenings now, the watch ticking on the arm beside her, and she did not say anything. She didn't need to. He came to her 3 days after the hearing. She was in the kitchen. He stopped in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed the room and went down on one knee, not asking, not proposing. He said, I need you to understand why I'm doing this. She said, I'm listening. You did not make me weaker, Clara. You reminded me what strength was supposed to protect. He paused. I've spent 3 years pointing every resource I had at the idea that if I found who did this, the silence would stop. But it wasn't about finding who did this. It was about making sure Milo's death meant something. And I couldn't do that in the dark. She said nothing. He said, I am kneeling because you deserve it, not because I'm weak. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Get up, Viktor. He stood. She said, I don't want the penthouse. He said, Tell me what you want. She said, There is a building on Crane Street that used to be a maternity clinic before the funding was cut. I want to open it again, for women who can't afford what St. Agnes charges. For pregnant women especially. She looked at him. I want to call it the Ruth Bell Clinic. He said, Done. She said, I run it. Nadia runs the pharmacy. You fund it and stay out of the medicine. He said, Agreed. She said, And you stay out of the medicine even when you disagree with my decisions. He held her gaze. Agreed. The clinic opened in the spring. The building on Crane Street had good bones. As her mother used to say about structures that had been well made and poorly maintained. You could feel what they had been meant for in the way the rooms were shaped, in the angles of the windows, in the particular placement of the examination room that faced east so that the morning light came in at a useful angle. Her mother had had opinions about light in examination rooms. Clara had inherited them. She stood in the main examination room on the morning of the first day and set her mother's watch on the counter by the window. The ticking was very clear. Outside, through the glass, Crane Street was already busy with the specific traffic of a neighborhood that ran on early shifts. A woman walked past with a child on her hip. A man in a delivery jacket locked his bicycle to the pole outside. Ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday morning. Nadia came in with a clipboard and looked at the watch and then at Clara and said, Your mother would have liked this. Clara said, She would have had opinions about the layout of the supply room. Nadia laughed. The first patient arrived at 9 in the morning. Her name was Diana, and she was 22 and 7 months pregnant, and she had been turned away from St. Agnes 3 weeks earlier because the paperwork wasn't processed yet. And she had not been back since, because the bus fare from her side of the city cost more than she had on Wednesdays. Clara sat across from her. She checked the measurements. She counted the heartbeat with the watch. She said, Everything is exactly where it should be. Diana looked at her with the specific expression of someone who has been given good news so rarely that they are not immediately sure how to hold it. Clara recognized that expression. She said, You can breathe. You and this baby are going to be fine. She did not promise Viktor that love arrived on any particular schedule. But she said, on an evening, when the clinic was quiet and the watch was ticking, and the light was going gold over the building on Crane Street, that she was not going anywhere. He had been standing in the doorway of the main room. He came inside. He said, "You protected me once when I couldn't protect myself. I would like to try to be that for you. If you'll allow it," she said. "I will allow it carefully." He said, "I can work with carefully." She looked at him. "Viktor." "Yes," Milo knew. She paused. "That voice message," he called, "because he wanted you to have something warm. He knew who you were trying to be, under all of it. He sent you a warm word so you'd have one." "Viktor was very still," she said. "You became someone he would recognize. That was what clearing his name meant. Not just changing a record. You chose the light so he could see it was you." She picked up the watch and held it out to him. He took it with both hands. He held it for a long time, the ticking steady and even, and Clara stood beside him in the room where women came to be told their children were alive and well. They thought Clara Bell had lost everything when the hospital took her name. But the woman they threw into the rain carried a watch, a child, and the one truth powerful men feared most. A heartbeat never lies. Count it, and you'll know what the body is trying to say. Even when it's the body of a man who forgot that strength is supposed to protect something. Even when it's the heartbeat of a child not yet born, moving in the dark, waiting to come into the light. Even when it's an echo of someone already gone, still ticking forward in the hands of the person who loved him most. It never lies. And even when it stops, the truth it leaves behind does not. And for every woman who comes through the door of the Ruth Bell Clinic, with nothing but a due date, and the bus fare they saved for 3 weeks to get there, it counts them in. It counts them as worth saving, every single one. If you're here for the kind of story where powerful men remember what they're supposed to protect, subscribe. There are more of these. And the next one starts in the dark, too.